Welcome to the Courage Over Cowardice podcast, where I cover topics and issues that will help you take a stand for Christ in culture. More than ever, followers of Jesus need courage to stand up, speak up, and to live out their faith, because people need to know that there's a God in heaven that loves them, and it is His truth that sets people free. Thanks for listening today, and I hope that you enjoyed the episode. Hey, I want to welcome you to our Courage Over Cowardice podcast. Today I have a very special guest with us. Her name is Landon Starbuck. Landon is a national thought leader, speaker, writer, and advocate countering human trafficking, specifically child trafficking and child exploitation. She's the founder and president of Freedom Forever, a nonprofit dedicated to protecting children from trafficking and exploitation and preserving freedom for all. And Landon, so excited to have you on the podcast today. Thanks for being on.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
So I just wanted to jump right in. I love so much of what you and your husband have been advocating and standing up for and influencing, within our culture. And I just want to talk a little bit about that. I'm not going to assume people that are listening to this podcast would be familiar with what you do. So maybe you could give a little bit of background, where you're from, how you got into advocacy, and then we'll talk the specifics.
Sure. I'm Landon Starbuck. I'm originally from Texas, from Dallas, Texas, but I moved to Los Angeles to have the Hollywood dream. I wanted to be a singer-songwriter, and I had a degree of success. I was a Billboard charting artist, but in that experience, I was exposed to a lot of what I call sexual quid pro quo in that system, where particularly women, young girls, would make certain decisions to get a trade-off in their career, to have their career elevated. And after a series of experiences with having to really decide, what do I want to do to maintain my integrity, I decided I didn't want to take part in that system anymore. And so I decided to just make music independently and ultimately leave that industry. And so I thought that God was going to use me to just speak on the horrors of the exploitation industry in Hollywood, or the child trafficking that goes on there. But it was really so much bigger than that. And I learned the facets of the exploitation as an industry, from trafficking to child sexual abuse, and became trauma-informed, served in different capacities with different organizations, and ultimately decided to start my own. And I felt very strongly that God was asking me to use my voice, not to entertain people, but to actually wake up people to the truth, to defend the truth, to be a warrior for His kingdom, for His truth, and to protect His most vulnerable, which is children. And so that is what I have dedicated my life to. But I'm also a mom of 3 children, 3 miracle children. And my husband and I are committed to making sure that not just our children have a future in America where they get to have a childhood free from exploitation, but they do have the freedom and liberty this country was founded upon and intended to maintain. So that is why we've dedicated our lives to activism, to fighting for truth, justice, and all of the godly values that we believe in so strongly.
And so you guys, when did that happen? So how long has it been? How many years?
So we moved to Tennessee. We live in Franklin, Tennessee, on a small little homestead. And we moved here about 5.5 years ago. I want to say it was in 2018, before all the craziness happened. And we left California. We made this leap of faith. We felt like we were being pulled in this direction. We also were very sick of the policies there. We were sick of the culture there that just seemed to be hell-bent on just degradation, just going this certain direction. And it was just not relenting. And I didn't want to sacrifice my children to that environment, to raise them in that environment. And so we were looking for, where are we supposed to plant ourselves? And we found this incredible place, Franklin, Tennessee, outside of Nashville. And it's interesting because a lot of other people have been brought here for the same reasons. So there's some really amazing freedom fighters here that are just dedicated to these causes as well, that we've aligned ourselves with, and churches rising up here. So it's a special place, but that's how long we've been here and really taking on this fight.
Yeah, that's awesome. My wife and I were just in Franklin, Tennessee for the first time at a Turning Point Pastors event. We did the walking tour, got some of the history, absolutely loved it. But I think that's fantastic. And You wrote about. I was reading some of your articles and just doing a little background in preparation for the podcast, aside from your posts and things of that nature. And you talked about how, in essence, people don't understand the background of what happens in Hollywood, in the singing industry, and bring that even now to what we're dealing with in these cultural moments of all-age drag shows. And we'll get into a little bit the Tennessee bill and how you guys were a part of all of that. Just a thought. Why, in your opinion, do you think that as you talk about these things, and it's so interesting, why do you think that people don't lean in? Why do you think they're not awake? We have people that are joining this podcast today, and they may not be familiar, and they're like, well, that's nice. That's kind of a nice side thing, but it's not a big deal. Maybe speak to that for a few moments.
Sure. I think that there's one particular reason that I found is the most prevalent reason. And that's that when you are forced to reconcile with the truth of what is happening, how evil the depths are, how much children are being exploited, to the tune of 32 million reports to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children of suspected online sexual abuse. That's just suspected online sexual abuse. And we know that those projected numbers are only a fraction of what is actually happening. So when we look at these things, it is so difficult to comprehend, to wrap our head around it, to understand how that translates to our communities. And it's not just this far disconnect. But when we really are forced to reconcile with these harsh realities, it doesn't just require us to know more. It requires us to do more. In fact, in some cases, it requires us to abandon an old identity that was enmeshed and wrapped and even dependent upon, in some cases, these old systems of having idols in Hollywood and having our children, handed over to the school system. It requires a transformation that is very difficult in some cases, and a complete identity, a complete rewiring of our brain. It is asking for a complete transformation of not just what we know, but who we are, how we show up, and how we actually are going to live. And that is why it's a very transformational moment to really reconcile with why are we here and what are we going to do about the most evil things that exist.
Yeah, no, that's so good. The scripture is really clear about these issues and how the Lord feels about children, and causing the little ones to stumble. It'd be better for them not to be born. And I think within us, there's this desire and this fight where oftentimes we don't fight for things that are important, but when it comes to children, people seem to be awakening to that. And one of the areas that we see that tide, I think, beginning to turn is related to the all-age drag shows. Maybe talk about your experience with them, your advocacy with them. A lot of people, they see commercials, they read a few things, but they're like, oh, that's over there somewhere. And it's not, it's everywhere.
Right. And it's that, apathetic attitude that has gotten us to this point. It's not the evil. It's the fact that we have buried our heads in the sand like ostriches, all of us, myself included. Yeah. I wasn't always awake to all this and fighting the way I should be. And reckoning with the truth. I'm here now, but that's why I encourage other people to do the same, to really see what is happening in their communities, because it's coming to every single community, if it's not there already. And these seeds have been sown a long time ago. So it's not something that happened just overnight. It seems like it is, but these seeds have been sown for so long, and it's an abandonment from Christians, from the church, from even just good people that say they care about these issues that we've been sleeping for so long. So when I started finding out about the drag shows happening in Tennessee, right? We're in the Bible Belt, red state. I just I couldn't believe this was happening. So one of the things I would start to do is to talk about, hey, this is happening. But I've learned as an activist, you have to show that it is happening. And you'll have people that are mad saying, oh, these are inappropriate, don't show these videos. But the nature of humanity, of people, is they have to see things to believe them. That's why we struggle with our faith so much. So when you have to see and experience that this is what's happening to children, that there's these grown, men or adult performers taking off their clothes, grinding, doing all these sexually explicit performances in front of children, then suddenly it becomes real. So, it's the same thing with the pediatric transgender clinics that we had here. Nobody believed me. I would talk about them, but it's almost until I wrote the article exposing what they're doing, proving, showing the pictures, having the families come forward, until that work was done, it didn't take a life of its own. People didn't really embrace that this is the truth, this is happening, because it's so much easier to ignore it or say, oh, that girl's crazy, she doesn't know what she's talking about, or, show me the proof. So we did the proof, and it takes a lot of activism at the local level to make sure you're documenting those things, and they need to be documented, whether you think there's going to be a sexually explicit performance or not. Sometimes there won't be, but then the next one people don't go to, and that's the one that is the worst. So we've learned so much, from just this process of documenting these things that are happening. But as a mechanism of doing that, we were able to create awareness, which galvanized people to say, hey, we don't want this in our communities. What do we do? And so we organized people, we demonstrated, and we put pressure on our legislators to act. And that's how we were able to then take it from this is happening in our communities to we need stronger laws to protect, from this subjective interpretations of what lewd and lascivious or obscenity is.
Yeah. So, I was reading one of your articles, and you had a couple of statements that you made. It's not just sexualized drag shows for kids. It's radical gender theory. It's pornographic books in schools. It's the attempt to normalize sex changes for minors. And it's radical sex ed focused on teaching pleasure instead of protection and prevention. It's all connected and part of the progressive ideological package. And the thought within you shared was children are being groomed to accept grooming behaviors as normal. Maybe break that down a little bit further as you're talking about the interconnectedness of the outworking of these ideologies and how you see this happening. You mentioned your community, but also what I want to get to in part of the podcast is what we can do about it, because everybody feels like, okay, I'm not really sure exactly what's going on and what can I really do about it. And I think your nonprofit and your advocacy is a great example to each of us to say, hey, we can do something about it. So maybe just talk a little more about the statements, radical gender theory, books in schools, and things of that nature.
Right. So, a lot of times we don't address a problem till it's explosive in our life, whether it's a health issue or whatever it is. And it's no different in the world of child exploitation and child trafficking. And we tend to focus on that endpoint of a child is being exploited or a child is being trafficked. How do we intervene now? How do we rescue? But the reason this problem got so big is because we never identified the prevention side. We never intervened when we were able to prevent the grooming. Where there's grooming, there's exploitation not far behind. And so if we can access the grooming where that is happening, that is a very important place to start, because that is where behaviors are normalized and accepted. That's the difference between a survivor recognizing that they're a victim or that they need help and to ask for help. It's the difference between somebody witnessing behavior and seeing it as a cultural norm, let them do them, and, oh, that's a sign that a child is being groomed. They're being subjected to sexually explicit performances. They're watching someone take off clothes for money, even though they're not naked. It doesn't matter. Yeah. It's the behavior that they're learning. They're seeing that that you get rewarded for taking off articles of clothing, dancing suggestively, and that is something that they are now understanding. Oh, this is how you get attention. This is how you get validation. This is how you get love. And then you throw in some very, childlike symbolism of unicorns and rainbows, and you have children being targeted, and it is normalized. It has become normalized. So that is the access point, the grooming, wherever it is happening. And it starts with examining our environments from our home on the inside out into our communities. And it starts with us, because we don't recognize that grooming is happening in our homes. Whether it's YouTube or whether it's allowing a child to have, unmitigated access to the internet, or go to friends' houses who have unmitigated access to the internet, things like that. Those are the point where a child is learning to accept grooming behaviors, to become groomed themselves, or to become grooming groomers themselves to expose other kids to those things.
Yeah.
And so it's a radical approach of, I call it a parenting revolution is what's needed, because parents have the most significant role and power in a child's life and we see these rates of abuse. And if children had parents that were involved and were paying attention, the majority of these cases of exploitation would not exist. And if the majority of children were not in exploitive environments, were not in environments that allow grooming, condone it, and even celebrate it, then that exploitation would not exist either. And so that is what we have to look at, our environments, take an inventory of our lives. And that's really what I would encourage the activists in the first place to start, is looking within our own homes and what we're allowing our children to be exposed to. How are they being groomed? What sort of ideas do they have about sexuality, about gender? Are we sending them into environments where we're condoning that they have to participate in a lie? It doesn't matter what we teach at home. It doesn't matter where we send them to church. If we send them to an environment that undermines everything we just taught them, we're teaching them that nothing really matters. It doesn't matter to stand up for your beliefs. It matters to learn to adapt and conform to the environment, to be liked, to be accepted, to be celebrated.
Yeah. The scripture says that wisdom builds the house. And, I think one of the difficult challenges for parents, my wife and I, we have 5 kids. They're all, 3 teenagers, 2 in their early 20s. And something that, we've watched over these years, we haven't been perfect parents. I don't think they exist, but recognizing and realizing the influences, whether it's through the public school education, books that are brought on, websites, all these different things, as you said. And I just want to pause there for a moment, because I think that you just shared some really good wisdom for families. Oftentimes we wait for a crisis to happen before we react to it. And I think it's so important, parents, it's little things that you commit to that you might say, oh, that's kind of, that feels like it's nonsensical, it's over the top. Like, one of the things that we've done is we said, hey, our kids don't do sleepovers. They've just never done sleepovers. And people say, why? And it's like, well, we just prefer them not to. Well, the reason we prefer them not to is because there's a high percentage of kids that are exposed to pornography, molestation, all kind of different things in those moments. And we just say, they can be at home, they can sleep in their own beds and still have friends. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about. Like what has been seen as maybe radical, actually is just like good parenting and paying attention and not following the culture.
100%. Yeah. And they've groomed parents in a way before they've groomed our children. They've groomed us into being take this passive role and, I don't want to be that helicopter parent. Well, what does that mean exactly? To be paying attention, to your child and what they're doing and, how much media they're exposed to. It's a good thing. There's been this separation for so long. How many more hours can we get kids at school? How many after school programs, where the average, I think, time that a parent is actually spending with their kids is 15 minutes a day. Active one-on-one, time. And that is just not enough. It's not enough to raise our children to become warriors, to be able to withstand all this evil and to be victorious against it. I mean, we're not equipping them. And so those things are so important. And to give a specific example of one of my failures as a parent, is, there's been shows like Disney shows that we have allowed in our home in the past, thinking, oh, it's, Mickey Mouse. It's these like benign shows. It's not any of the more, I guess you get to that next level of Disney and that's when they really start doing the indoctrination. But what I didn't realize is that I was saying it's okay. Some of it is okay at this young age. But then they went on to say, well, how come I can't watch this and my friends can watch this? But I said it was okay. I condoned this whole thing. So when I say, oh, well, some Disney's bad, but not this, but we still give them our money, but we can't go to Disneyland. I'm not being consistent with what I'm saying that I stand for. And I'm allowing that to come and groom me first and then groom my children. And then I'm going to be the bad parent that just cuts it off. Like I'm creating more work for myself by doing that. And so, that you live and you learn, when you know better, you do better as parents. But on my 3rd child, I said, nope, we're not doing the Disney. We're not doing it all because I know where this goes. I know where what the agenda is. And, it was so much easier because now they don't know what they're, I guess missing out on, or they know that this is the way it is. And alternatively, we create even more, enjoyable experiences for them that are not
Yeah.
just, Disney.
Yeah, no, I think that's so important. That's so good with what you're talking about, because the scripture tells us, don't be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. There is a pattern to this world that we need to be aware and continue to be led by the Spirit. And I would just say this, kind of piggybacking off of that for a moment, with parents. One of the things that we've chosen to do, my daughter did go to high school. But we chose to homeschool our kids so we could be the single greatest influence in their lives. And so often, we react to people like, all the different jokes. Well, homeschool kids are, not as well as equipped, or they are weird, or they're whatever, those things are. And I just want to say, it's so good to be a contrarian to the culture and not just accept these lines and these pressures that are given, because the grooming, and this kind of a transition statement, or rapid onset gender dysphoria is one of those things that you look at and you say, okay, that just a little bit in a short period of time can have overwhelmingly tragic results, and we've been too trusting within that. So we've seen that happen, and that's ongoing in these issues. And I bring that to lead into the Tennessee bill, Vanderbilt Health, and all those things. So maybe you can start with not only the advocacy that you did, but how you found out the issue that's going on nationwide, with just horrific treating children like Frankenstein, chemically castrating, just pervasive, debased, degenerate behavior by adults, and how they're taking advantage of kids. I just forgot to tell you exactly how I feel with that. So go ahead and just share a little bit about that, if you would.
Sure. So I think this was about 3 years ago when I learned that there was a pediatric transgender clinic at Vanderbilt in Tennessee. I couldn't believe it. And I looked into it, and I didn't know at that time that they had actually performed surgeries on minors, sex change procedures. And I knew that they were doing the hormones and the puberty blockers. And there was such deception around what they were doing. They weren't transparent. So when I first just tried, just as a citizen journalist, to get information about what it is they're doing, it was very, concealed. And that's never a good sign, right? With a teacher, with anyone, if that's a huge red flag, by the way, if nobody is transparent about what it is that they want to do with your child, what it is that they want to expose your child to or teach them, or what it is that they even believe, if they have to hide it, that's not a good sign. So yeah. I realized it was so hard to find that. Then, a family came forward to my organization, my nonprofit, Freedom Forever. And they know that we combat all forms of child exploitation. They said, hey, I don't know if you do this. I know that you help, sexually abuse kids and trafficking, but, my child I feel like is being exploited by the system. And, these doctors are asking them to be alone with my child. And they have this thing called mature minor doctrine, where they had to sign a consent form for me to be allowed in the room with them. And I'm the parent. This seems really backwards. But again, these parents are deceived and groomed into thinking they don't have rights, that this doctor in a white coat gets to talk to their child about their gender and sexuality.
Yeah.
This is the starting point, right? That we've been deceived first. And so yeah. I started, following these different cases. More parents with stories came forward, and we were able to uncover the fact that these children, that this is a multi-million-dollar industry, that once they're hooked on these drugs, they're dependent on big pharma for life. They will never be able to just go back, and they perpetuate these lies saying puberty blockers just put a pause on puberty. And that's not true at all. I mean, they're giving these children, especially boys, when you give a boy Lupron, their penis stops growing. So you are chemically castrating these young boys who have not even gone through puberty. And we know that the majority of children who complete puberty go on to desist. They do not want to be trans. So if they're experiencing gender dysphoria and they're allowed to complete puberty, they will not choose to transition, or they will not struggle with their gender dysphoria. However, when they're put on puberty blockers, the opposite is true. And that is why we see such a push. And at the same time, they portray it as this benign intervention, almost as if it's saving them from the sex change operations that aren't happening, but they are. And so we had so much work to do to expose this. And it wasn't just myself, it was other incredible activists all across America that we worked together in some cases to try to get to the bottom of these truths. With Boston Children's Hospital, Duke University, I mean, they would take these things down. The doctors would boldly, proudly declare that they are doing hysterectomies, gender-affirming hysterectomies on minors, double mastectomies on minors. And then they would take these YouTube videos down when our media would push back, when we would get stories run exposing it. And they would literally pretend it didn't happen. And then there would be a bomb threat called in to a hospital, and they would blame it on activists like us. It's the same rinse and repeat cycle that we've seen in so many different areas politically, right? Well, they did the same thing here. And so they were able to perpetuate these lies, like the stats from the Trevor Project. And they use emotional blackmail to make parents feel that if they don't subscribe their child to this lifelong chain to Big Pharma, that they're a bad parent and that their child will kill themselves. So it is such an evil ideology, and it is so incredibly dangerous. And we are losing a generation to this. It's not just the children that are experiencing gender dysphoria. It's the children being groomed to want to be trans, to fit in, to conform, to not be a part of this victim group of, especially of white, there's a reason there's so many white kids that are transitioning, not black kids, not Latino kids, but white kids. So it's a way to escape that oppression group of being the oppressor.
Yeah, no, you're right. And it's so incredibly destructive. And you mentioned about the Trevor Project and some of the initiatives that are out there. It really is emotional blackmail. For listeners that may be unfamiliar with that, maybe I don't know if you're prepared to, what are some things about that that parents need to know, or just someone that wants to be involved and active needs to know?
Sure. Well, it's really important to know that the government-funded school systems in particular, but also a lot of private schools, so it's our due diligence to ask the questions, but they're affiliated with groups or nonprofits like the Trevor Project, which claim to have an anti-suicide hotline to reach the LGBTQ youth who are in trouble. They also have GLSEN, which is tied to SECUS, the Sex Education Information Council of the United States. So this is all coming in under the education umbrella into the system. So whether it's through radical sex ed, whether it's through even SEL, it's coming in through CRT, all of these other mechanisms to groom children into accepting gender ideology. And so they use these nonprofits who are very well funded as a mechanism to reach the children where they can't maybe get a curriculum explicitly mainstreamed, right? So in areas like Tennessee, we don't have like a radical sex ed from Planned Parenthood in all of our education system. But they'll use other mechanisms like bringing in an after-school program, a PRISM club, things like that to introduce these other mechanisms to get children their first visit to Planned Parenthood, a free ride to Planned Parenthood, all of these things. Or, they have things like on the Trevor Project, on GLSEN's website, they have like a quick exit feature. So if they can get kids to the website to do the grooming and indoctrination, there's like a quick escape features to hide it from your parents. They have the ability to chat with adults about their sexuality, about their gender. We expose the Q chat space, which even our own, what is it called? The, during COVID, the medical system, they promoted this as well. Not the NIH, but the other one. I'm just like completely mind blanking. The one that regulates all of our health stuff. They're the ones who push.
Sorry, I'm no help there, but yeah.
No, I'm like, this is so, I can't believe I'm blanking on this one. But anyway, this is government to education system, to nonprofits, to schools, to after school programs. If you can imagine it as like this mountain, this trickle effect of dollars and influence. And so that's why it's really important that, if we're down here at the ground level and we do have kids exposed to these things, whether it's social media, whether it's, internet, whether it's other children with access to these things, whether it's the school system, that we're asking those questions and making sure we opt out of all of those things.
Yeah. It seems overwhelming when you begin to think at the highest levels of government, our president and his administration continues to push these initiatives. And you said emotional blackmail, because that's exactly what it is. If you don't do this, you're killing your child. If you don't do this, it's what abusers do. They groom, they abuse, and then they blame it on you. And in so many ways, it's so bad, and we need a revival and an awakening in our nation that is first spiritual, but then goes into the public square in every way. The transitioning of children, which is, I hate even using those terms because they're Orwellian and the propaganda terms of gender-affirming care, when it just means butchering children for the rest of their lives to make money. We look at those things, and I'm sure those that are listening to this may or may not be familiar. They're probably checking out your Instagram and on the website and all those things right now, and they're saying, man, I want to be able to do something. What would you recommend to pastor, Christian, business person, house mom, across the spectrum? What are some things that you'd say, here are some things that you can begin to do today? Some people, and let me add on to this. Some people say, well, you know what, I'm glad I don't have kids, or my kids are grown, as if they have no responsibility. And I think some of the most important people right now are those who have wisdom and a little more time that they can give to these things. But maybe they just lack a little bit of direction. So what would you suggest?
Absolutely. When our children are being exploited, it is all of our problem. And some of the best fighters I know are, older, they're seasoned, they have wisdom, and they actually don't have young children in the home. So I think there's definitely a great place for them in this advocacy work. One of the things that could be helpful is to identify, when we're talking about where the grooming is occurring, and not waiting for the exploitation and the trafficking to occur, but in the grooming phase of, in our environments, in our communities, are there sexually explicit books being promoted to children? How did they get there? Who on the school board is voting this in? Who is not doing anything about it? What are the libraries that are taxpayer funded? What are they allowing in it? Is it in the young adult section? What is young adult? Does it mean 12? Does it mean age 10? These are we have to become investigators to understand the answers to these questions. And then when there is something like that, there's the enforcement piece. Why can't we get it out? At what point is there an arrest made? So if a drag performer comes and does a sexually explicit show and they're taking off their clothes, is there an amount of clothing that has to be removed? Is it, showing nudity? Or what if it's fake nudity? What if it's a rubber prosthetic? Does that count? These are all questions we have to have the answers to, and know where our law enforcement stands, where our DA stands, where our state stands, what we have the power to do and what we don't. Because if we don't understand that first, then we won't know how to be effective to take that next step. So a lot of where people stall out is that they'll find out something happened in their school, and they'll say, oh, I went to the school, I talked to the principal, and they said, yes, they do have that book, but it's the gaslight and say, oh, well, it's part of being inclusive, and that whole spiel. And then they say, I don't know what to do now. And so, there's a lot of things we can do. We can blow up photos of those books. We can organize other parents. We can show that it's sexually explicit. We can ask our law enforcement, does this fall under the criteria of distributing pornographic content to minors? If I did this at a park to somebody else's child, would I go to jail? Where are the protections? All of these questions have to be answered. And the reason is it's different in every community, in every city, in every state. It has not been consistent. And that's one thing I've learned, is that they want this quick approach of how you solve it. But it looks different in each city. Sometimes the problem is that they will make law enforcement says, we want to arrest this person, but our DA said, don't do it. We won't prosecute it. So we have to be informed citizens. We have to understand how this is happening, how it's being allowed, and then really strategize from there of how we can effectively get it removed, or how we can effectively create awareness or pressure campaigns to make sure that parents know about it and make the ask of what they can do about it at that point.
Yeah, that's really good. What does your nonprofit offer? How can people connect with it? What are some of the resources that you have that are available?
Absolutely. Well, I think I'm biased, but I think that we have the best resources available of everything I've researched. It's really important now more than ever to make sure that, especially when we're giving to nonprofits, whether it's mine or someone else's, that we're value based, that we are aligned, because you're going to find a lot of information that is wrong, that is telling
Yeah.
people, that they're doing one thing and they're not doing that one thing, or that they are serving a particular community and they're not serving that particular community, or they're using it to promote critical race theory, or they're using it to promote false, information, like the thing that they do all the time, which they say, oh, poverty is the root cause of trafficking. Therefore, we have to address poverty in these other countries first
Yeah.
before we can deal with, the exploitation here. And people wouldn't believe some of the biggest nonprofits and organizations in America are on that side of things, are promoting all of these ideas. So it's really important with our dollar to be really discerning of what nonprofits we choose to align ourselves with, because otherwise the strategy is not going to be effective. It's going to be doing the opposite. So that is
Yeah.
one thing that I would just say, whether people want to, look into my nonprofit or anyone else's, is just to be very discerning with your dollar. But our nonprofit, we partner with the people that are doing what they do best rather than reinventing the wheel. So we're a prevention and activism based organization. So we partner with the best people, helping parents educate on tech safety from protecting their routers at home, the best people on child sexual abuse safety, the best people messaging on fact and providing fact cards for gender ideology, so people can take them and take these pamphlets and postcards and share accurate information to awaken
Yeah.
people. So we find the best people doing what they do the best. And then what we do is we act as this mass arm of education, getting this information, getting these resources out to as many people as possible, while at the same time advocating for victims, for survivors, providing aftercare resources for them. We also have a news feed called The War on Children, which is the first of its kind news feed addressing all of these issues, so people can stay informed and also know what they can do about it. So we are always training, mobilizing people to take that next step beyond the education. So that's the first piece, is that prevention-based education, but also what they can do about it. And we're really excited because we have the first of its kind United States digital child protection map, which will be done this year, where people can click on their state and there'll be a drop down of what those access points are, what the needs are. And we're particularly focused on increased sentencing for child rapists. So those hands-on offenses for, and also child pornography, what we call CSAM, child sexual abuse material offenses, which are a very big problem, that they're getting harsher consequences because these offenders are getting out every day across America with a slap on the wrist, and there's no penalties, there's no consequences, which is why this crime is growing exponentially. So we're identifying the greatest needs and figuring out a way to inform people and mobilize people as quickly as possible.
Yeah, so good. Your website is freedomforever.us, and so many great resources that are there. And I think you're leading in this way that's so inspiring. And we can just start where we are. We can just start, in our homes, in our school districts, which we're being awakened to in our area and community, and then how we can be a part of the change on a broader level. So often we focus on what we can't do or what we don't know, instead of focusing on what we can do and what is within our capacity and capabilities to change. Before we kind of bring this together, is there anything else that you'd like to share about this that you would want to encourage everybody listening to the podcast and any of these topics? You've eloquently shared so many details, and the resources that you have available are so good. Excited to have you at our conference in August. I'll mention this before I give the final words to Landon. We're doing a 3-day event, 2-day conference, and then we'll have some people back with us on Sunday as well. We have Rob McCoy from Turning Point Faith, Dave Englehart, who's a part of that as well, Dr. Brittany LaBeouf, who is my niece and amazing, Chad Conley, Kurt Weaver, a lot of wonderful people, and the Landon Starbuck. And the purpose of this conference that we're beginning this year is to mobilize Christians to stand up, speak up, and to live out our faith with boldness to be a disruptive force promoting truth and unity in the midst of a confused and an anti-Christ culture. And I'm excited to have you come and inspire and speak to everyone. So check that conference out. We'd love to have you a part. But Landon, go ahead and bring this all together.
Let's see. Well, I guess I would just end with something that inspired me that I heard my pastor share yesterday that really just, it hit home for me. And, there's so much fear of man happening, which is why so many don't take action, and they'll make up excuses as to, oh, it's just too hard for me to talk about, or, I'm busy, I have this, or, I'm sure it's not that, whatever the excuse is. It's really at the root of this is the fear of man. And of what people will think when we share the facts about gender ideology, when we openly talk about how drag is inherently sexual and an adult, activity, not for children. People are afraid of the consequences of this bully culture, of what will happen to their job or their friendships or any of that. And I really feel that we are all being called to be warriors, not just me, not just a few activists, but all of us. And, I would ask people like the question, and then I'll talk about what my pastor said, but, what is the point of being a Christian, of saying we have these values, of trying to train up our kids in the way they should go, if we can't model that for our own children? There is no point. Might as well, live for yourself and, follow your feelings and indulge yourself, because there is no point if we are not going to actually live out what we say we feel in our heart and know in our minds about the true word of God, about our destiny here. So it's bridging that gap of like, how are we not living out what we know is true inside? And he said something about, about the darkness. He said, if you went into like a hotel and all the lights were off, you wouldn't call down at the front desk and say, hey, there's a darkness problem in here. It's very dark. We can't see anything. You guys have a darkness problem. They would fix the light and say, no, you have a light problem. Turn the light on. And now there's no darkness. So again, why we are here is not because of this incredible act of evil, of Satan taking over, and it's all lost because this is Satan's world and it's fallen. We're here because there's not enough lights being turned on to light it all up and to activate the body of Christ. We're here because we are not salting the earth as we were supposed to. The good news is that if the enemy were as powerful as he says he is, we'd be done by now. The good news is that we have more lights turning on all over the earth right now. And it's really just about how quickly and how fast and powerfully we can get more lights turned on, where it makes it more powerful against all of these evil agendas. So we actually can turn around. I reject all of these notions that, we're waiting and sitting on our praying hands till Jesus comes. That's not what we're called to do, even if Jesus was to come tomorrow. So, we have to embrace the difficult, embrace the hard, embrace the uncomfortable. It's not going to be easy. But this is what we are here to do. And the more we walk in that, the more power we have, and the more people we find that are in that same alignment, that are actually our true friends and brothers and sisters. So it's been a beautiful thing. It's been a hard journey, but it has been the most beautiful journey as well to get to meet all the incredible people doing this work. Yeah.
That's so good. As we live in this country, I just thought of, oftentimes we say we have a unique opportunity because we have freedom, but the reality is we have a unique responsibility because we, the people, actually, we're the leaders of this country. And so we can make a difference, and we are obligated to make a difference, both from a biblical standpoint, and even if you don't believe in the Bible, but you're just part of this nation. As we live in this Jezebel moment that, rules by the spirit of fear, manipulation, intimidation, be silent, censored, be quiet, we're going to ruin you, so that people will bow down to the demonic worship of the day. We need to, like you said, we need to stand against it. We need to rise up with the Spirit of God within us, and we need to have courage over cowardice. And you have that. You and your husband doing a fantastic job inspiring people all over the nation. Thank you so much for using your voice. Everybody check out her resources and be sure to come and be a part of our conference at the end of August and meet Landon in person. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope that you have a great day.
Thank you so much. I can't wait to be with you guys soon.
Hey, thanks so much for listening. I hope this message has inspired you to courageously stand up, speak up, and to live out your faith. If you like what you heard today, give me a 5-star review, follow the Courage Over Cowardice podcast, and share it with others to learn how to stand for truth in the midst of culture.